Imagine yourself in a desperate situation, trapped in the Andes after a plane crash, or living in a prehistoric tribe facing starvation. What choices would you make to survive? Today we're looking into one of humanity's most controversial practices, cannibalism, the act of consuming members of one's own species. But before we go any further, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe as a way to support our channel. With that said, let's keep things moving. It was Christmas Day in 1846 in the Sierra Nevada mountains when 17 members of the Donner Party struggled through deep snow on snowshoes. The blizzards returned, trapping them, and one after another, they began to die. The day after Christmas, facing starvation, they made an unthinkable choice. Weeping and unable to look at each other, they resorted to cannibalism. Although we associate cannibalism with desperate survival situations like this, many cultures throughout history practiced it not from necessity, but as part of their traditions. Even animals are not left out. Many of us find it hard to even talk about animals eating their own kind. While this might seem strange to us today, it's actually pretty common in the natural world. Scientists have found more than 1,500 different types of animals do this. From tiny water creatures to land animals, it's just another way some animals live. Nature has some wild survival tricks. Even before they're born, some baby sharks compete for food by eating their brothers and sisters right there in the womb. Baby birds sometimes do something similar. Stronger chicks might push out or eat their weaker siblings to get more food for themselves. Big cats like male lions and even bears have their own surprising habits. When they take over a new family group, they sometimes eat the cubs that aren't theirs. This might sound rough, but it helps them pass on their own family line. Plus, it means the mother can have new cubs sooner. Most often, you'll see this happening with animals that don't have backbones, like insects, fish, and frogs. Birds and mammals don't do it as much. But when they do, they can be just as tough as the smallest spider. Speaking of spiders, female spiders have an unusual habit. After mating, they sometimes eat the male spider. While this might sound harsh, it actually helps the female spider stay strong and gives her future babies a better chance at survival, since there's more food to go around. Chimpanzees fiercely defend their territories, particularly when food resources are at stake. When different groups meet each other, tensions can rise quickly. It's not particularly nice, but being their world, they pick on mothers who are alone with their babies only because it's a way to keep their own group strong. They scare other groups off their food and try to make sure their own family has the best chance to live well. In 2013, for instance, a report from Senegal described a group of chimps who handled an old leader in a startling way. After exiling him for 5 years, they attacked him and even ate parts of his body, a drastic way of making sure he would never rejoin their group. Male chimpanzees at the Gombe National Park were twice seen attacking infants of females in the same group, another case of in-group cannibalism. While one baby was killed, another was partially eaten. An event in Uganda saw one mother and her daughter eating 3 infants of other females from the same community. On the whole, of course, the chimpanzees do cannibalize in one context or another. Some of our closest living relatives, chimpanzees, have shed light on the early evolution of social behavior. This behavior seems to be so prevalent in extant hominids, including modern humans and chimpanzees, that it might have been common in prehistory. Fortunately, our ancestor or close relative fossil record can directly inform us about cannibalism during these remote periods. In fact, most, if not all of us, probably descend from cultures that practice some form of cannibalism. It is evidence in the remains that shows the oldest evidence of cannibalism in our genus, 800,000-year-old ones in Europe. The species in question is a hominin archaic species, Homo antecessor, that descended from Homo erectus about 1 million years ago. It was the cannibalism which was discovered in the Grandolina cave in Spain's Atapuerca Mountains. The remains of a variety of people, mostly children, have been discovered there, showing evidence of cannibalism. With stone tools, they cut the flesh from the bones, and bones were smashed to get at the nutritious marrow therein. To be sure, Homo antecessor was the only species around at the time, so anything that can't be accounted for was cannibalism. But deer also lay scattered throughout the cave, and both deer and antecessor individuals appear to have been butchered in a similar way. The bones were also both discarded on the floor of their living area. A good deal of information about different types of cannibalism can be derived from historical accounts and ethnographic research. Such practices can be explained with the help of archaeological research, with the help of historical and anthropological data as well. However, analyzing prehistoric human remains is not easy, and therefore it can be hard to tell what exactly went down. The archaeological site at Herxheim, which is found in the Rhine Valley of Germany, close to the French border, was established in the years 5300 to 4950 BC, during the early Neolithic period in Europe. This site belonged to the linear pottery culture and was estimated to be about 6 hectares or 15 acres. Herxheim was a settlement, but it was definitely an extraordinary one. Usually Neolithic settlements of this period were accompanied by small family graves or graves under houses. Herxheim was different though. There were no neat ditches. Its enclosure consisted of lines of closely located, often irregular in shape and size, oblong pits of different depths and lengths. The largest of these pits was 4 meters, 13 feet deep, and was constructed in a manner that followed a very systematic procedure over a long period of time. Actually, the linear pottery culture is famous for its longhouses, but what is inside these enclosing ditches makes Herxheim unique. Each of the pits contained the remains of more than 1,000 people, animal bones, fragments of pottery, stone and bone tools, and sometimes jewelry. A significant number of bones is fractured, and one pit may have held from 2,000 fragments of bones, which could be placed in nests. There were also many skulls, but the majority of them were only the upper part of the skulls. Following the death, or virtually immediately, the skulls were prepared. The soft tissue was taken out and the lower part of the skull was chiseled into a kalats, or a skullcap form. In 1910, a young man from the Four People of Papua New Guinea got an infection while hunting and died in his village in the Eastern Highlands. His community buried him for 3 days without mourning, and when the women stepped in to prepare the body of the deceased, they dismembered him, cooking and eating every part of him that the women ate over the next few days and weeks, including his brain and bones. These funerary rites were considered crucial to aid his soul in the journey to the other world and to shield the society from evil spirits. This practice, known as endocannibalism, entails eating people from within one's society. Reverend Richard Leith actually made a tour to Fiji, and in 1848 he toured the house of a dead infamous cannibal chief of Fiji known as Udra Udra. They were followed by the chief's son, Ravatu, who took him a little over a kilometer away from the village, pointing out that his father had used stones to tally up those he had consumed. According to the Rouse, 872 stones had been set on the pathway. Ravatu said that his father tasted all these people himself and shared none with anyone while eating sparingly. A man of impressive girth, Udre Udro was nevertheless able to put a lot of food away. Although people still recall that Udra Udra cannibalized in the region and declared that he ate almost 1,000 people, this action was by no means probable. Nevertheless, the Fiji Islands were called the Cannibal Isles because some of the inhabitants practiced exo-cannibalism from time to time. These warrior cultures included cannibalism in their culture, and Fijians were no exception, despite it being not only Fijian cultures. In many societies across the globe, the winners would eat parts of flesh of the vanquished in warfare, and this was done to outrage and degrade the enemy, to obtain possession of all such energy which the fallen warrior possessed, and for a number of other motivations. This kind of cannibal tendency is known mainly from history and ethnography. When this kind of research is supplemented with historical and anthropological knowledge, archaeology can be beneficial. It is always difficult to pinpoint certain occurrences when studying quaternary paleoanthropological population samples. So how do archaeologists actually identify cannibalism? The evidence has to be pretty clear, and there are several key signs they look for. First, they examine the cut marks. When stone tools strike bone, they leave distinctive V-shaped scars. These appear when someone cuts through muscle attachments or dismembers a body. Then there's the way bones are broken. Our ancestors knew that bone marrow was nutritious, so they'd crack open long bones to get at it. The patterns of these breaks can tell us if they were broken while fresh or after they'd been buried for a while. Here's where it gets really interesting. Archaeologists compare how human and animal bones were treated. If a group was practicing cannibalism, they'd likely process human bodies the same way they process their prey. So they look for similar cut marks, accounting for the differences in human and animal anatomy. They also study how the bones were thrown away. Were human and animal remains mixed together in the same trash pits? This can tell us whether human bodies were treated as food waste or given special treatment. Cooking leaves its own markers. Bones that were boiled, burned, or heated show distinct patterns, and sometimes they find tooth marks, though determining whether these came from humans or other medium-sized animals can be tricky. The cannibalism found in Neolithic Provence stands unique in European prehistory. Was this a local cultural practice, or something unusual? One theory suggests a predatory group might have used the cave as a base, similar to how Fiji's chief Udra Udra took his society's practices to extremes. Modern practices like keeping ashes in urns or making memorial jewelry seem normal to us now. Yet using a relative's skull as a drinking vessel for yearly remembrance would shock most people today. This shows the vast difference between our customs and those of our Neolithic ancestors. After the Neolithic period, European burial practices became simpler. People were buried or cremated, marking the end of physical interaction with the dead. In contrast, Neolithic peoples maintained ongoing relationships with their dead through secondary burials and continued processing of remains. These ancient peoples built complex tombs where remains were repeatedly handled, processed, and reburied over generations. While we can't make absolute conclusions, the sophistication of their mortuary practices suggests ritualistic cannibalism might have been one part of their broader approach to death and remembrance. They saw death not as an endpoint, but as part of a continuing process. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to share, like, and subscribe to our channels for future uploads. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.